Okay, we are now recording the session. So again, hello and welcome to this session, T-Levels and Gatsby Benchmark 7. Really pleased to be joined by Natasha and Tracy. We're going to be talking around these topics. So no further ado, I'm going to introduce Natasha Watkinson, who will be able to give you a bit more info around her role and lead the content for the first part of this session.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today. Really pleased to see so many of you. So my name is Natasha Watkinson. I'm a project manager at the Gatsby Foundation, and I'm going to talk you through a bit of the background to T-Levels, and then we'll go into what they are, a bit of the detail about how they are operational and what the qualifications landscape is going to look like in the coming years, and perhaps start some discussions about how you can interact with T-Levels in your areas. I am going to be joined by Tracy Parrott from Barnet Education Learning Service. She's just messaged me to say she's having trouble getting in, Connor, to flag that to you.
Okay, I will send her a link.
Thank you. I was going to do the first few slides, so she's got a few minutes to join us. But I will start us off, and I've got a few slides to share, which I'll just put on the screen now. I think we will try and save questions until the end, unless there is anything I say that just doesn't make sense, in which case we can stop for clarification. But we'll try and get through as much of this as we can to allow a bit of discussion at the end. This is quite a big topic, so we could spend all day on this. So this will be a bit of a snapshot and introduction, and hopefully it kind of suits where you're at in terms of your understanding of T-Levels and technical education. And hopefully we'll tell you something new, as well as kind of revisit the background for what we know and why T-Levels and the technical education reforms are happening. So I will start by talking about a bit of the context to technical education and where the Gatsby Foundation comes in. So Tracy and I will jump between us a bit, but I'm going to start. And I'll talk firstly about the overall technical education system and the background to T-Levels, just so we can introduce the fact that these kind of didn't come from nowhere, and there's a well thought through rationale for their introduction. So Lord Sainsbury is the founder of Gatsby Charitable Foundation. He was asked by government in around 2015 to produce a report on the technical education system in England, and he did so in what became the Sainsbury report, which was published in 2016. Government took forward those recommendations and are continuing to implement them, and a kind of key outcome that we see in that is the implementation of T-Levels. The principles that came through really strongly in the Sainsbury reports are some of those which I've outlined here. The ones that I want to pick out in particular are the moves towards there being a single qualification for education and training towards technical occupations at level 3, which we see in the form of T-Levels, and which are aligned to the same occupational standards which underpin apprenticeships. So we are developing a system in which, whether you study in the classroom or you achieve your level 3 training in the workplace, you're working towards the same standard. And that's kind of the fundamental thing about T-Levels. That leads us to a national framework of standards for occupations, so they're occupationally focused, developed and governed by and with employers with oversight from government. And the approach to that was that these were designed with reference to the world's best technical education systems. So where we know that technical education works particularly well in countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and the Nordic countries, we see these national systems of standards and qualifications, in contrast to what we've had, which has been famously complex. And so the underpinning goals of the reforms, and which T-Levels are a key plank in supporting, are to increase the clarity of the system and the quality of the education that's available to students by giving them more time to work towards their learning outcomes. The system's structured into the 15 technical routes. So these are the subject areas that we're talking about when we think about technical education. There are a couple of these in which we won't see T-levels because the consultation with employers has indicated that they are best achieved through an apprenticeship route. So things like transport and logistics, labour market information and employer input tells us that that's best approach to an apprenticeship rather than a classroom-based qualification. But I just list these here to give you an idea about the subject areas that we are thinking about. This slide gives a little bit of information on the programme of qualifications reform, which is ongoing, led by Department for Education. So you may well have heard that government is removing funding for qualifications which overlap with T-levels and others which don't meet the criteria that they've set out in terms of clarity of purpose and outcomes for progression opportunities for students. And this is the kind of the simplified picture which government are working towards for the qualifications landscape, which we'll start to see from 2025. So while I said that those 15 routes cover most areas, T-levels don't quite cover every subject area that students are working on at the moment. So some subjects which fall outside of T-levels will see other qualifications continuing. It's an evolving picture at the moment because the exact landscape of qualifications that will be available depends to a degree on what awarding organisations propose for delivery. So we don't have a list of qualifications that will be available quite yet, and that's something that teams at the Department for Education are continuing to work on. And I've put a resource in the last slide of the presentation so you can get into a bit more detail about the vision and the process that's going to take us towards that status. One other resource that's worth flagging is the occupational maps, and these give us a picture of the structure of technical education divided into the 3 columns. So the first one is where T-levels will sit, and I'd encourage you to go in and have a look at these maps because they are a useful resource in demonstrating how occupations are grouped and where the apprenticeship standards which underpin qualifications like T-levels and also higher technical qualifications are, and what the content of those is. And they don't aim to show a linear journey through a career for an individual, but they show some of the occupations and potential pathways through where those, particularly where they are accessed through further technical education, further education and training as you go through the levels. These are developed as a resource which I think has potential to be developed into something that's really useful for careers advisors in particular, and that's something that that we're working on with Gatsby at the moment through the CDI, who are looking at developing resources to support careers advisors to work with young people around technical education, make sure that the information is as of good a standard as is available about academic options, and that the full range is covered. So that's something that we're putting quite a bit of attention into at the moment. And I think the occupational maps could potentially be developed as something really useful in that direction to support careers advisors in their work with young people. So we've talked a little bit about the background and purpose of T-levels, but I'm going to hand over to Tracy now to tell us a bit more about what a T-level looks like.
Thank you, Natasha. And if you're okay, just to move through the slides. If I miss connections this meeting, that would be really helpful to as you started. So thank you. Just to follow on from Natasha's point, maps exist. They've been really useful in my role that I have of working with schools and colleges and young people and parents, and they've certainly fed into building progression routes forward from T-levels, so they have been really useful. So I'd recommend taking a look at them for sure. So in terms of why have they been introduced, I think it centres very much around there being a need to raise the prestige of technical education and how it's perceived by school students and parents, and it's certainly in terms of the academic rigour of the curriculum of the T-level is successful in doing that. As we've mentioned, it's an attempt at addressing skills gaps and providing a range of qualifications that are meaningful to post-16 students. They've been co-designed with employers, trying to better meet the needs of industry, and ensure that the kind of curriculum on these courses teaches students relevant skills and provides them with knowledge that will be really good when they're actually in the workplace. In terms of how many T-levels students study, they pick one T-level, so it's really important that in the who are they for section that the students are really interested in that particular career pathway, because they are opting at 16 to pursue a career in a certain sector. So in terms of historically, as an ex-leader of a sixth form, you would have had students who chose vocational qualifications that could be quite broad if they did 3 different ones. So it's a real move, if you like, for students to focus on one subject in one area. And the progression routes, as we've just mentioned with the occupational maps, could definitely be into apprenticeships and employment, but also into universities. And the amount of universities that are accepting T-levels is increasing over time. So as the qualification becomes more widespread, more universities are aware of this as a progression pathway. And I've worked with our local university in the borough of Barnet, which is Middlesex University, to really look at how they can prepare to welcome T-level students onto their courses and how to best align certain T-level students to certain courses that they offer. Thank you, Natasha. So in terms of the subjects that are available, we've got a colour-coded diagram here. T-levels started in 2020 and they started off small in terms of the range of courses that are available. So in 2020, you could have chosen a T-level within the construction route of design, surveying and planning for construction, or education, childcare and digital production design and development. So you can see, and I won't read through all of the different years of delivery, you can see that there's a range of courses that are offered, and that has grown over time. And there are some that have been delayed, decisions made by the DfE and by the government to hold back on those, defer them until they are actually secure and ready to offer those and confident that the qualification meets the rigorous standards that they've set. Thank you. So what does a T-level look like for a student in the classroom? So there is the core curriculum knowledge, which is up to half of the qualification, and that focuses very much on knowledge and understanding and theories, and that is assessed in an external examination at the end of year 1. So if you like, the students who pick this course in year 12 are almost preparing for an A-level style exam within the area that they're being taught. So there's quite a lot of focus and time on study, classroom teaching in that first year. And in the second year of the qualification, which is kind of how schools and colleges have tended to build this, is that they then focus on the occupational specialism in the latter part of the first year after that first exam, and then into the second year. So that accounts for the school input, if you like. So I often refer to it when working with school leadership teams and governors that it is the flip of an apprenticeship, that you've got 80% of the time spent in the classroom and 20% of the time spent in the workplace. So the opposite to what an apprenticeship would be. So the industry placement is another key component, an essential component of the T-level, and that is between 315 and 420 hours over the 2 years. Within that 315 to 420, there are insight hours for students to complete. So before they actually start their placement, they carry out activities to ensure that they're best possibly prepared. So they range from employer visits, site visits, employer talks. So all the time trying to make sure that when the young people actually go to the workplace, they're as well prepared as possible. Maths and English is a core component, again, of the T-level, and students are, if they don't start the T-level with a grade 4 in maths and English, they have to build curriculum time into making sure that those students can continue to strive towards that, because as we all know, it's a passport into the world of employment. In my experience of working with the schools and colleges in Barnet, we don't have students who don't have both maths and English starting our courses due to the rigour of the qualification, and they may be missing one or the other, but it's not a case in our schools and colleges that it's both at the moment. And there may be additional requirements depending on the T-level that is chosen. So for example, for construction, they do need the CS card to go into the industry placements. So all of those parts form the T-level. As you can see, it's kind of a full qualification, and they have to succeed in all areas of the qualification for them to actually pass the T-level. Thank you, Natasha. So to break down at one T-level so that you can understand, if you're working with schools, careers advisors and so on, that you actually have an understanding of the decisions that the schools have to make if they're thinking of offering a T-level. So I've chosen to break down the health and science route. And as you can see in the health and science route, we've got 3 different T-levels. We've got the health T-level, we've got the healthcare science T-level, and we've got the science T-level. In addition to deciding which subject they want to do out of the health and science route, they also need to choose the occupational specialism within each of the individual T-levels. So for example, if a school or a college decides they want to choose and offer the health T-level to their post-16 students, they then have a further decision to make about which of the specialisms listed on the right hand side that they're going to choose. So they would choose between dental nursing, supporting healthcare, which could either be adult nursing, mental health, therapy, children and young people, or midwifery. So the decision making process is quite complex for schools, and that's part of my role that I have in Barnet, that I support schools on that journey. So they may look at resource, they may look at facilities, they may look at the strength of their teaching team, and existing curriculum, because as Natasha mentioned, there are going to be qualifications that are defunded going forwards. So it may be that they look at the courses they currently offer in their sixth forms that are popular, where they've got good student uptake, where they've got good results, and they try and map it as best as possible across to a T-level. So it's certainly not a decision to be taken lightly, and also lots of discussions need to take place within school to arrive at that. But hopefully that helps understand kind of how the T-level is formed, that it belongs to a route, and then within the route you have a qualification, and within each qualification there are different occupational specialisms that schools and colleges can choose. Thank you. I've often been asked when working with governors and parents in particular about how T-levels are graded. So as I mentioned, still students choose one T-level, and they receive one overall grade at the end of that qualification, and that can be a pass, merit, distinction or distinction star. So that part aligns with the current BTEC courses, for example, that exist post-16. They then have a separate grade for the core components. So remember, that will be the external exam, and that's set at the end of year 1. So they have an A star to E grade for that. They then have a separate grade within the occupational specialism, which again would go back to pass, merit or distinction. So each child would receive one overall grade that is made up of the core component and the occupational specialism, and all of that will be shared on the certificate with the student at the end of the course. Thank you. How that aligns to UCAS points for the students who are thinking of going to university, you can just see there a table that I've created that kind of marries it across to UCAS points, but also the equivalent in A-level grades. And we've got there a hyperlink to the acceptance onto different university courses. So as I mentioned, that has increased over time. I've been in post 2 years now working for Bells, and that list has only grown over time. And as the universities become more confident with the qualification, And like I said, there are more students nationally, they become more aware of it, and that list is going to continue to grow. And Minister Halfon has done an awful lot of work with universities in terms of rallying them to accept T-level students onto courses. So there's a lot of work that is going in behind the scenes to only increase that number. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy, for that. I'm going to go into a bit more detail now on the industry placement. Tracy's already mentioned where this fits into the structure of the T-level. So as she said, it's a minimum of 315 hours, can be more if the employer and the provider and the student want to make it longer. But that's on average roughly about 45 working days. And the intention behind it is that students get a real experience of the workplace and can, towards the end of that placement or throughout, start making a really positive contribution to the workplace. And we've seen some really good examples of projects that students have done for their employers, and the benefit that has had in leading on to employment opportunities, where we've seen quite a few cases where students have stayed on, been offered jobs and apprenticeships with the company that they've done their industry placement with, and that's a really, really good outcome for the business who's been able to get to know that student, and for that young person who has a really good foot in the door to start their career once they can come back having finished their T-level and have a job there. We're seeing a really good range of industry placements taking place already for current T-level students. So to go back to the health and science route example that Tracy's given, there are industry placements taking place in midwifery units across the NHS, various departments, commercial science labs in pharmaceutical companies, path labs seem to be quite a good opportunity for students. And that range is increasing. There's always a need for more employers to keep offering industry placements. So you will see a huge drive from providers to continue bringing employers in to work in partnership, offer industry placements, start that journey through the work taster activities and insight hours that Tracy's mentioned, to kind of build their relationship with these cohorts of students and with the FE providers. So there will be that the growth in industry placements will obviously increase in line with the growth of T-level delivery. So that's something that a lot of effort and attention continues to go into. And as Tracy said, she used the word confidence, and I think that's really key to this. The more employers try it out, the more they'll see what T-level students can do, and where they can go on to and be an asset for the businesses. Wanted to mention as well about T-level foundation programs. So these are prior to the main T-level programs. So many T-level providers are offering foundation programs to prepare for their main T-level offer, and these are designed for students who are not quite yet ready to start a T-level, and perhaps that's because of their grades at GCSE. Tracy mentioned English and maths requirements, or who've not settled on the route that they want to go into and continue their study at. So a T-level foundation program will be in a particular subject, so aligned to the T-level, so health and science, for example, and they're designed for progression onto a T-level. That's the intended outcome, though it's possible that students can make different choices about their next step once they've started a foundation program. Some providers are designing their T-level foundation programs to include a qualification. Others are choosing not to, but I think that the trend is towards doing so. So mostly level 2 qualifications feature as part of foundation programs. And these are the components that these programs offer, and they typically take a year and cover these areas. And the technical content is based on some national technical outcomes, which are defined centrally. So students on programs at different providers are working towards the same goals, and those goals draw on the relevant T-level content to support progression into that qualification afterwards. And it builds students up from level 2 so that they're ready to start a T-level once they've completed their foundation program. And I thought it was worth drawing attention particularly to this resource, which tells you where T-levels are being delivered locally. I know that some of you will work with some organisations which are delivering T-levels already, and others that are still to come. Because we're in a time where the rollout is continuing, we saw that timeline earlier. The offer that we see now will continue to evolve and change. More providers will come on stream and start to deliver T-levels in the coming years, and the providers that are already delivering will start to offer additional subjects, different T-levels, and to increase their cohort sizes. And that's something that the reforms to the qualifications landscape that we've mentioned will continue to drive. So you will see growth in T-levels. And if you go on this link here and put in the postcode for your area, you'll be able to see what the status is now, and it'll tell you what's coming up in the next academic year, which new providers are coming on stream. Tracy, I'll hand back to you for this one.
Thank you. So we were asked just to touch upon the provider access legislation. So it is just information that we were asked to share with you. So this came into force last year, and schools must put on at least 6 encounters for students between year 8 and year 13 during normal school hours. So schools now that I'm working with are ensuring that they are giving students encounters through either workshops, assemblies, careers days, careers fairs, talks, a range of activities, and planning that there will be 6 in total over that different time period. So 2 within the first 2 years of secondary school, 2 within Key Stage 4, so year 10 and year 11, and then voluntary encounters in year 12 and 13. But to be honest, in my experience in the schools that I'm working with, the voluntary part in year 12 and 13 is pretty much what schools were doing anyway, to ensure that they were offering students in year 12 and 13 information around university employment and apprenticeships, and a growing interest in apprenticeships for sure. And all of this is in line with the Gatsby Benchmark 7 to offer encounters with further and higher education. So there may be some of you who are familiar with that, but like I said, we're just asked to share that information, so hopefully it's useful. Thank you. So I just want to touch upon, if in your work with schools, that there is support for schools at all levels of schools. So whether that be for support staff, governors, SLT, curriculum leaders, subject teachers. The ETF are a fantastic organisation who have been commissioned by the DFE to work with schools at no cost to schools. And when you apply to and plan to offer a T-level, you're allocated a representative from the ETF to work with your member of staff that's leading on the T-level implementation, and they will guide them through all of the opportunities that the ETF offer. So like I said, there is a real range. So it starts with kind of raising awareness with all levels of school staff. There's support for governors, support for SLT, support for people who are writing schemes of work, and upskilling teachers particularly for schools, is a key thing around the industry insights, because most school teachers lack relevant and recent industry experience. So what the ETF support with is offering and helping schools source industry insight programs, and these are financed to be able to release the member of staff from their normal duties in school. So for example, I'm aware of T-level teachers who spent time in Google to better understand the digital T-level in the context of the Google Office, but also to gather an understanding of what the industry relevant environment looks like, because the school is meant to, or the college is meant to, try to mirror industry spec equipment, resources. So that obviously means that the schools have to go out to research and find out that and gather an understanding. There are numerous networks, numerous webinars, and there are mentoring programs that the people can sign up for. The improvement projects are projects that are worked on by staff in teams, and then they're quality assured, and then they are shared. So as the T-level rollout continues, this resource is only going to get better and better and better because of the amount of experience that people who are now on perhaps year 3 or year 4 of delivering T-levels can support people who are about to start. So within my role, I've attended many different sessions that the ETF put on for schools, and the mentoring program is something in particular that teachers that I've worked with have found really valuable. So if a school that you're working with is interested or is currently delivering or planning to deliver, then this is certainly an organisation that will be supportive of them on that journey. Thank you, Natasha.
Thanks, Tracy. So we've talked quite a bit, and we wanted to give you some things to follow up with in your own time, so you can choose which bits of what we've discussed are of most interest to you or you want more information on. So I've put some links here, and there's a slide next that Tracy's put together as well. We've got some information here about some of situating T-levels in the education landscape in its broadest form. So all of the different options, including T-levels, which feature on the Skills for Careers website and the Education Landscape website, which was developed by Gatsby for businesses to understand the different asks that come at them from education, so they know how to respond to different requests and which is most suitable for their business. Information on T-levels for anybody who wants to understand in more detail any aspect of the programme, and then support aimed particularly at employers, especially around industry placement, but also around thinking about progression opportunities for students and where they might go onto in certain businesses through apprenticeship routes or employment, and there's a lot of practical guidance on how to do industry placements, how to set them up, all the documentation that's required. And something that I should have mentioned about placements as well is that there's currently an employer support fund available that employers can access to cover the cost of any tangible costs that they incur in setting up an industry placement. So equipment, IT, and also staff time as well, and that's available through the providers that they're working with to take students on placement as well. So there's more detail about that on there. The link to the occupational maps that I mentioned, and further information about qualifications reform if that's something that you're interested in, and understanding the timeline about in particular, so you know what to expect in terms of changes in the coming years. And I'll just echo what Tracy said as well about the kind of momentum of the T-level programme. We're at a really good place now where the more providers that offer T-levels, the more students we see going through them, the more those students prove themselves. When we did these kind of presentations 3, 4, 5 years ago, we were asking people to take a bit more of a leap of faith in working with T-level providers, but now we do have the evidence to back up that these students are going on to successful destinations. We're doing some work around gathering that destinations data at Gatsby to see what the trends are in terms of where students are moving on to, and there is a huge range of case studies which you can find in some of these resources, and some of these also that Tracy's recommended having a look at, to highlight examples of what students are doing on placement, what they're going on to do afterwards, so you can see how these might work in the areas that you work with, from the point of view of individual students, employers and providers as well. Tracy, is there anything that you want to round off with at this point? Oh, you're just on mute there.
Thank you. Sorry. No, I mean, I don't think so. I think there's an awful, even within the 2 years I've been working on this project, there's an awful lot more information around than there was, and I totally agree with Natasha. There's an awful lot more people involved in them, kind of believing in them, and aware than there were when I first started in post. So it's a qualification that is growing, and I personally think it's quite an exciting journey. And I think the qualification, coming from the background I come from of working with kind of legacy BTEC qualifications and what the students actually learn on those courses, I think the T-level curriculum is so much more relevant and so much more engaging. So there is reticence in schools around them. I'm not going to pretend there's not, but I think in terms of the advantages, they definitely outweigh the disadvantages.
Thank you. So I think we've got a bit of time left, and Tracy and I'm happy to take questions. Connor, do you want to take us through that?
Firstly, just before I jump into, we've got one question in the chat so far. Please do, if you've got questions, either pop them in the chat or come off mute. That's absolutely fine. Just wanted to thank you both. That was so informative, and it's so positive actually to see where this has grown to. Obviously, at the Careers Hub here, we've been supporting this where we can for a few years now, and it's really great actually just to see the kind of level this is all moved towards, and the amount of resource that is available for schools and also for those businesses and those employers to engage with this is just so much more robust at this point. So yeah, really looking forward to supporting this into the future. There was one question that came through from Siddy around HR being included in your 15 areas. I think it was mentioned in your, Trace, in your color-coded diagram that it was being replaced. Have I got that right?
Yes, I think Natasha might know maybe more about that than I do, but certainly it did exist as an option, and then it looks like the business and administration route have changed the qualifications within that route to replace it with sales, marketing and procurement, and they're aiming for 2025. That's certainly my understanding.
Yeah, there's not a T-level in HR or an occupational specialism in HR per se at the moment. There is an apprenticeship standard there, so I think it could happen in future, but it's not been developed into a specialism or a T-level option currently. There probably are elements of it that are covered in the management administration and the marketing and some of the other areas, but not HR in itself at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. And we've just got one through from Simon. You mentioned, Tracy, that there was reticence from some of the schools. That's something we definitely see as well from a Careers Hub view. What is the typical pushback that you get from them, and how would you resolve that?
So that's a difficult question.
Yeah.
So the typical pushback, I mean, it very much depends on the school, and it depends on the school leadership team, and it depends on a willingness to embrace change. There are concerns around the industry placement, in terms of finding the industry placement and the amount of time the student is meant to spend on the industry placement. But I think there's an awful lot more being done to try to kind of take that obstacle away, in my opinion, certainly, that an employer can go and register an interest, for example, to offer a T-level, and a school can search for local employers who are offering them. So there's mechanisms that people are trying to put in place to overcome that. And I think the key thing that I'm certainly finding in the work that I do, I apologise if this is a little bit too education based, there are students who are on level 3 vocational qualifications in sixth forms and in colleges who've got, say, a combination of grade 3s and grade 4s, for example, whereas looking at the T-level curriculum with curriculum leaders and subject specialists, they sometimes feel that curriculum is too tough for a grade 3 or 4 student, particularly when they're assessed at the end of year 1 with an external examination. So the pushback, if you like, is varied depending on the school, and that there are a range of the different things that have been said. If that answers the question.
Yeah, I might just build on that slightly to say that I've had a bit of pushback in the past. I've been sort of promoting T-levels quite heavily in the past, and one of the pieces of pushback I've had from school leaders is around the the reticence to kind of pigeonhole students too early, and I think you covered that a little bit in terms of your who is this for, and it's making sure, and I wonder if you agree with this, that it's making sure that that advice and guidance the student receives to that point is really, really robust, so they're making an informed decision. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that as well. That there's certainly, because certainly in the borough that I work in, most of our providers offer 3 single vocational qualifications to their post-16 learners. So a child, for example, could choose BTEC Sport, Health and Social Care and Business, for example, which means there's pros and cons of that model, to be honest with you, but I won't go through those now. But that means that that child, for the sake of argument, has got different choices at 18. Whereas if they're choosing a T-level, they need to know that they're interested in that career pathway, which is why I've spent a lot of time looking at progression routes to show the breadth of where you could still go, even if you do a T-level in a certain subject. So, for example, we've got 6 T-levels being taught across Barnet at the moment. And I built with a couple of universities progression routes of kind of saying, right, okay, if a person did T-level health with midwifery as a specialism, where does that mean they can only become a midwife? And the answer is no, it doesn't mean they can only become a midwife. But then it's about making sure that schools, students, parents really understand that information. And I agree with you that we've also done CPD in Barnet for our careers advisors around T-levels, so that they are able to advise and guide kind of year 10 and year 11 students in particular, because it is an option that they can choose to study within our borough. We felt as a local authority that we wanted to make sure that the people who were speaking to students about pathways going forwards were well informed and weren't misinformed, because there was certain misunderstandings and misconceptions that we were encountering in our conversations. So part of my role has very much been launching T-levels in Barnet to kind of almost pick away at the obstacles, if you like, for want of a better word, and try to identify where we might have problems and put solutions in place with different stakeholders to try to overcome them. But I certainly agree that the narrowness, for want of a better word, is part of the school reticence that I encounter for sure. I don't necessarily agree with it being that simple, but that's certainly feedback I've had from school leaders, so I totally agree with you.
That's really useful, Tracy. Thank you for that. And then one more from Charles. Do T-levels cover essential soft skills that are needed in all jobs, such as punctuality and team working? It's often the lack of soft skills in many young people that is a theme that we get from employers when they're entering the workplace. Is that something that's sort of covered through those placements?
Yes. So I would say
it's fine.
yes, it's certainly something that is included in the content, and I think one of the strengths about the T-level design as well is that those essential skills are contextualized, so students will, in the core component, and I've just brought up the structure of the T-level again, within that core component, a lot of that is technical content, but also contextualized. What does working in the digital in a digital business look like? What are the skills and expectations that employers are going to have of you? Providers will integrate those areas into the curriculum, and a lot of it is kind of set out in the qualification content as well, to kind of subtly build it in, as well as being explicit in what providers are teaching, that being able to demonstrate that students have covered that essential skills type content is something that providers find as a real advantage in selling their students to a potential industry placement employer, and every employer raises that whenever those conversations are had about possible industry placements. So yeah, it's something that is definitely a big feature explicitly and implicitly as well in the content and what providers are delivering.
So both of the providers in Barnet have kind of there's employability programs. So there are deliberate kind of explicit sessions that prepare the young people. We've also looked with the school that I support, we've also looked at an industry placement contract to kind of make really explicit expectations, which we've co-written with the person offering the placements to the students. So we've kind of looked at, preempted the problems, put things in place to make explicit to parents, but also to students, what the expectations are. And I also think the insight hours play a really valuable part in that, because I built the insight hours curriculum for the health students in one of our schools. And in writing what we were covering in the insight hours, we definitely touched upon the soft skills and the employability skills and expectations, because I think if, certainly from my own experience, if students hear it from a different voice rather than just from their teacher, from their head of sixth form, and from their college lecturers, the more people they hear that message from, the more seriously they're going to take it. So we tried to be really quite smart in it not just being something delivered in-house, it was also kind of reinforced when visiting the employer sites we were matching the students to.
Brilliant. That's really thorough. Thank you for that. I haven't got any more questions from the chat. I just had a very brief one actually around, there's no expectation for employers to pay students for the industry placements, but I have been in conversations previously where there's no requirement for them not to either. I'm right in saying that. In your experience, have you come across any models where pay for placements is something that is being discussed, or is that just very unlikely given, you know, the support that's on offer already for employers and so on? I mean, I'm aware of, with some of the placements that we have for our students in Barnet, that there's support with lunches, for example, and support with transport costs. So they are being paid in inverted commas, but it's to help subsidise travel and food. Brilliant. Okay. I'm going to open the floor. So if anybody is holding on to a burning question and would like to come off mute, then now is your time to do that. There's no more in the chat. Okay. Yes, Sue. You're on mute, Sue, at the moment. There you go.
Right. Yeah, I'm an enterprise advisor for a school in Southwark, and one thing that I think is really useful to get across to that sort of audience is that other countries sorted this issue out a long time ago. And for UK PLC, we've got to go with this. I've been working in human resource management since I was 21 and I'm now 70. And I was the woman representative on the, it was called the Manpower Skills Council for Gloucestershire. And I was working in the water industry, which was part of the public sector then. And I very quickly realised that the UK's attitude to technical education was a deep-seated and hugely structural problem. And as a almost from that age member of the Labour Party, I was horrified when Blair got elected and went education, 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 as if training didn't exist and didn't matter, and continued to underfund the further education sector. And so I just feel that it really is hugely optimistic. I mean, I've also got a master's in business and public sector strategy, and it is hugely cheering to see something that looks as if it might work and sort out a huge national problem. So thank you for the presentation. And that's a comment, really, not a question.
Natasha, do you have anything to come back on that?
Well, thank you. Firstly, that's it's brilliant to hear such a great endorsement and support. I think on the point about international systems, we do quite a lot of work at looking overseas and visiting countries where we have got these elements that we're moving towards under T levels, and it is always really striking that they do still seem to struggle with the same issues that we do. They've spent a lot longer trying to address them in terms of participation of employers with education and bringing that link closer. And there are different structures that make that easier or more straightforward, which I think we'd hope to develop in this country with under the influence of iFate, who've got some of that responsibility. But their young people are the same as ours, and they still, I think, despair slightly that more employers aren't involved with education and providing workplace experience for students. I think they've got enough, but they always want to see more. So that we have got a big cultural change to make ahead of us, but we've started small with it, and it will just build and build. And I think I'm really glad to have people like you on side to keep making that happen.
And just to build on that slightly, most of our audience here are enterprise advisors in various schools across central London, and the role you play is quite unique actually in terms of that bridge between industry and education. So the resources and the information we'll make sure is shared with you through your coordinators, and if you are sort of passionate about this and wanting to push it with your careers leaders, do have a conversation with your enterprise coordinators around how to strategize that and support this kind of work in your areas. We have a hand up from Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Haley. I'm from Equans. I'm a Community Engagement Officer and Social Value Lead and an Enterprise Advisor. Not necessarily say if it's a question or not, but I've seen the kind of, demise, should we say, of the UTCs. Is this kind of a, trying to get the T levels kind of into an element of a mainstream and kind of do away with the kind of the separation of the UTCs? Because I worked with a UTC in Westminster, and also I live in Watford, and the local UTCs recently closed as well. So I've had 2 UTCs closed in the last 2 years.
Thank you for that question. So it's not sort of my area of expertise, but I mean, my understanding is that there are UTCs who are delivering T levels, so it's going to be part of their offer. I don't know enough about the UTC landscape in general to really answer your question about the direction of travel, but we know that there is some uptake in UTCs of T levels, and there isn't any kind of explicit strategy to stop that happening, and they're encouraged to to take them up as well as other providers. Yeah. So sorry, I can't really answer.
No. I thought it was kind of a bit of a throwaway question, really, to get a bit of debate kind of slightly going in that aspect, because you would think to yourself, T levels and UTCs would be literally a hand-in-hand aspect of it. We're literally then targeting, particular individuals, and there's a driver somewhere along the line. But it seems like we're now obviously trying to. It's looked at quite mainstream now, and we're having to kind of reinvent the wheel with a lot of the kind of the teachers in the education general kind of education system to kind of promote the industry.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get a satisfactory answer to your question in this one, but maybe something that we can pick up separately from a Careers Hub angle to see what we can uncover there. Are there any other questions? I'm just conscious of time. We've got a few minutes left, so if there are any sort of last minute ones that people want to throw in, speak now or email me later, I suppose. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance. Great to see so many of you here. And thank you, Natasha and Tracy, again, for such an informative and positive presentation here. As I mentioned, the session has been recorded, so we'll make that recording available to you all to refer back to, and make sure the information is shared with you as well through your coordinators and on the Enterprise Advisor Google Drive as well. So from all of us here at the Careers Hub, big thank you to our guest speakers today. Thank you for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
It was great.
Bye.
Thanks.